All right, guys, so this is going to be the recording for how to apply your actual image onto the backgrounds. There are a couple of things that I do need to talk about real quick on what you need to be very careful with. Watercolor, and this is why I like watercolor, is not 100% permanent. If I were to get water and put it on here, it will re-wet itself to where I can still manipulate it, which means that if I take an eraser to a dark spot on this especially, you'll see the difference also on the light spots, but more on the dark. And I were to erase really hard, I can accidentally erase some of that color, which I will change some of that background. Good thing is that if people got some spots that you're like, man, I want this to be a little bit lighter. So if I come here and I start erasing at this, I can lighten up the blue because I don't like how dark it got on that spot. But you can see the difference if you were to rewind the video and see that. I'll show you again one more time on this part because it did get a little bit dark. So you can see that all of this is dark. If I were to come and let's say I want this dark line to have more of this movement, I don't want that there. I can come here and I can erase a little bit of this. And you can see that now that I erased, now that dark spot is not a whole dark spot that was here. It has that little S shape now. So there are little things that I can do to manipulate the watercolor, but because it can be erased, this is why you need to be careful when you're actually applying it to the paper. So I do want to make sure that as we're going over the drawing, I'm going to give you guys some techniques on stuff that you guys can follow to be able to take care of your backgrounds. Same thing for now, even though marker is a little bit more permanent, I would have to actually wet it for it to move. You can still damage it slightly. So it's still depending on whatever you guys did for these. I have to make sure that you guys are aware of the techniques that are possible for both of these, okay? So there's two ways about drawing it. You can either draw it the way I'm doing here, and I chose to do the flowers just because this last weekend I've been doing all gardening this whole entire weekend. So I figured, okay, I'll stick to the whole flower theme. So you can either choose to draw on it the way I did, and the same way that I showed you guys. Of course, you would have to be very, very light with it. So let's say I wanted to add a couple more flowers to this, maybe some smaller ones on the top. I want to keep it as light as possible. I want to make sure that it's the outline only. And as I'm drawing, be very self-cautious on this and make sure that you're going slowly, cautiously applying the circles and so forth that you're going to use as a guide, and as light as possible. You can see, you can barely see that. Like if I go real close, you can see it, but for the most part, I'm keeping it light. So as I draw my outline on this, and I come and I draw the outline for the petals, I mean, remember guys that we don't want the pencil to come through 100% either. So I should be light with it anyways. However, I do want to make sure that it's light enough so that way if I add those like circle marks, that when I go and I erase them, I'm not damaging the watercolor background, okay? Now, if you did your watercolor background and you're not 100% happy with what you see as far as like, well, I like those little splats, but they got too, because of how it was still wet, they got too diluted, like they started spreading and so forth. I want them to be more tight of a circle. Then you can also go back and add some more of this at this time before we start with the actual color pencil and so forth for the next time around when we're adding the additional stuff that we're going to add to this, okay? For today, the only thing you have to work on is the outline. That's it. So all you're doing is applying your outline to wherever it's going to be, whether you decided to do the fish, whether you decided to do the eyes. You can do multiple eyes like I showed you on some of the examples from the last time. You can do one larger eye. I wouldn't do it so large that you take up the whole entire background. Like if I was going to do a big eye, I would not place it like right dead center. I would probably put it off a little bit to the side maybe, and maybe just a little bit smaller so I don't lose my background. Placement is very important. So if you guys want to send pictures of what you have on Remind and say, ma'am, I want to draw the goldfish. Where's the best placement? I can't figure it out. These are things that you can ask me on Remind, and I'll go ahead and help you guys out if you need it. Okay. Now, going back to placement, it is very important for you guys to understand that you want things to be balanced. So when I was coming up with the whole idea of I want my flowers to be right here, it's because I have the movement of these lines over here that if I do place them here, I will create a balance where my eye is going to want to go already in a circle. I'm going to have movement. So I was explaining to the other class that this particular type of project, one, I show you because you know, it's an easy, fast way to be able to get a whole entire art project pretty fast. Because even though I'm breaking this up into a lot as far as time frame wise, because we're taking this slow, if you were to do it quickly, you could easily get a piece done like this within maybe 30, 40 minutes if you want to work it fast. I know it took time for the watercolor to dry, but I did explain to them that if I wanted to have this dry very fast, I can easily just take some papers, place them on top, put a book on it, let it sit for about 5 minutes, and it should be dry. Because this will soak up the remainder of the water. Or if you have a hair dryer and you need to dry it quickly, that also will also help dry very fast, or even putting it in front of a fan will help it dry very quickly. Within 5 minutes, it should be enough for you to be able to get on there and, you know, draw on it. Okay, so just FYI. So at this point, with where we're at here, you know, getting something like this done, you know, I was talking to them that if you guys ever have a project, let's say in history class, when they make you guys do like the maps or things like that, and you want to make it look like coffee stain, you know, if you have watercolor and you have the browns, you can kind of get that same effect. Or, you know, at this point, let's say they ask you to draw your favorite person in past history, like, or, you know, draw George Washington or something like that, because he's your favorite. You know, something like this with a watercolor background and then drawn like portrait style and so forth like that, you can get it done very fast, and you're not spending like a week on trying to draw George Washington, you know what I mean, because of the process that I'm showing you here. Also, I even gave the example last period that those of you guys that are not going into art at all, and maybe you're not even going to have any projects that they ask you to do something like this, if you become a parent later in life, like myself, who has 3 kids, I'm kind of glad I knew these techniques, because when they ask us to do those whole projects that you have to submit, and they want it as a family, you know, project, and technically, you know, that you can't have a kindergarten kid do something that they're going to be able to place where it's like 100%. These are kind of little techniques that will help you do something quick, especially if you have a job that you have to come home and then help your children out with these types of projects. At least you know some of these techniques. So it's not necessarily like, even if you're not in the art field, you can still use these somehow, sometime around your lifetime, you know. So I try to show you things that will, especially in my art ones, that will last for you guys. So going back to the placement, for those of you guys that end up going into any design job, like if you're in architecture, things like that, placement is a very big thing when you, as far as like being able to get your attention around the whole entire piece. Also, if you're into people who go into advertisement or things like that, these are kind of things that help you. If you're a business owner later and you need to know about placement to be able to have contrast between things and capture the eyes of your audience and so forth, that you want to be able to, let's say, promote a, even if it's selling like a product or things like that, certain placements of things are going to capture the attention of the viewer a lot faster. So those kind of things are very important for you guys to learn when you're doing this. So if you're struggling with that part, or learning like where do I put it, ma'am, I don't know where to put it, just ask me on Remind, okay, with any of those kind of questions, color questions. If you're like, well, ma'am, what should I do if I have my background this color and I want to apply another color to something like this on mine? What should I add? Like, how should I go about it? What should I choose? So these are things that you need to make sure that you ask, so I can help you understand why we choose certain colors and so forth in the first place, okay? Now, if I was looking at this one, and I was explaining to the guys earlier, was that the Sharpie here, I did not take the time to leave the water long enough. Remember I told you that you might have to be sitting there for like 20 minutes, reapplying to be able to get that effect. I just left it alone. So at this point, just ignore this, pretend that we're just looking at this if we're looking at this particular project here, okay? And I'll probably draw a little bit of something on here, just because with the first class I did this particular one. And if you notice, I did my outline. This is all that you have to do for today. Now, you can either choose to draw it the way I just did it right now, like when I was applying this one. So you can draw it physically like that once you know exactly where things are going to be. Or there's another option. So this is what I'm going to cover with you guys. If for those of you guys that are kind of like scared, you're like, no, what if I mess it up? I don't know if I'm placing it right, or I don't want to do a lot of erasing, that sort of thing. So your other option is you can get a copy sheet of paper and kind of look to see, well, I know I want my flowers to be right here. And the size frame, let's take a look at it. So I know I want the flowers to start somewhere about right here. So I'll make my little mark and then come over here and say, well, I want the top flower to be somewhere about right here. So you'll know what size to draw your image. Maybe I want it to be placed more here. So I know it's not going to go beyond this, beyond this. So you figure out first the size, draw it out on here. So if I were to draw my flower shapes, I would do the whole entire drawing. Take your time on this part because this is going to be the one that's going to help you with the rest of the drawing. So you're just going to take your time. And then you would draw the whole entire thing the way that I showed you guys. So I'm doing this fast just for the sake of the video, so it's not so long. But you would take your time, do your drawing as perfect as possible, outline only. So you don't have to do any shading on this. It's just the outline. The moment you're done with your drawings, this is what's called the transfer method, okay? You basically go to the back of this and you're gonna apply a lot of pencil on the back. So think of this kind of like a stamp or a print. You're going to only place the pencil on the drawing itself. You don't have to fill the whole entire paper because that's a waste of time. So what I tell my kids is look up in the light, hold it up to the light so you can kind of trace where your drawing is at. So let's just say the drawing is only in this section. That way, when you put the pencil, you only have to worry about that area. You're gonna fill all of it to look like at least this that you see here. You want it to be as even as possible because if you're doing a lot of this and you're just going like this, and if you see those spots that are missing, when you do the transfer, those spots are not going to transfer onto your paper. So you want to make sure it's as even as possible. And the moment that you have this whole entire thing filled, so let's pretend all of this area looks just like this, you're going to take it, you're going to place it exactly where you want it without moving. You go and you trace your drawing. So remember, we do not recommend tracing an art. I'm only saying to trace your sketch, your drawing onto here. So that way, as you go up and down, because I have that pencil in the back, it's going to transfer. And when I remove the whole thing, because I'm finished tracing it, you will get a stamp of your image on the back of it because there's pencil on the back here. And as I trace, that pencil gets transferred onto the paper. That's why they call it a transfer, okay? So it's not gonna come out very clean line. You'll see some areas that you'll have to go back eventually and go clean up and fix the drawing slightly. But this is a technique for those of you guys that are maybe scared of applying the drawing straight onto it and think, man, what if I mess it up? What if I'm doing too much erasing and so forth? So this is just an option for those students, okay? Now, like I said, I never recommend tracing, but in this case, you're tracing from your original drawing, so that is okay. Now, if this was an assignment, for example, for a history class, and they, like I said, they ask you to draw, you know, George Washington, that's probably gonna take a long time. So if you end up doing something like that with the transfer method, you know, well, eventually you're gonna take it off and draw a little bit of it and maybe add some shadows and things. So technically that's your own. And, you know, if it's just a quick little assignment for something like that, it's not a big deal. But if I was doing an actual art piece like this one for an art class, which is what we're trying to do, is something more original, then tracing is not okay. So please don't do that for this one. Like I said, the only reason why I would allow you to do this is because this is already your drawing. So it's okay if you trace it onto here because it's your drawing that you're tracing, okay? So just, yeah, giving you guys some feedback, and I wanted to show you this method too, if ever the case, if it's something like that, like for your child or something that you have to help them with a project and you don't have the time because, you know, you're working a 9-to-5 job and you get home already tired and then having to help your children with homework and so forth like that. This is just something to kind of show you guys that you can use later in life, okay? And not just that, like, you know, even if you guys go to college, they ask you guys to do certain things. At least you know something that you can do quickly. You know, like I said, you should be able to get it done within 30, 40 minutes if you do it from start to finish, as far as like just this quick method, okay? So are there any questions as far as that? And again, I will stop the video if you don't want to be on video, but I just want to make sure that I answer them just in case right now, if you don't mind being on video. And then the other only thing that I do want to talk about before I end the video real quick is that just to verify that all you need for today is the outline only. You don't have to do the colored pencil. Just so you're prepped for the next class, I'm going to be using color pencil for the next class. And then after that, when I see you guys, we're gonna be using things like markers. I'm also gonna use a ballpoint pen to show you some techniques on how to do things so you don't have to draw 100%, but still make it look like it's 100% finished just by using other little materials. So it's colored pencil, markers, ballpoint pen are the major ones. But if you have other materials, like let's say you guys have oil pastels or things like that at your house, or chalk or things that you want to try messing with, at the very end, once everything is done, you guys can add other materials if you have it. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and end the video there.